Dear friends, good evening. I'm Liao Jinzhong, a baker of Angel Yeast Baking Center. I am very glad to introduce how to make blackcurrant nut bread to you tonight. The bread making involves 7 aspects. Blackcurrant is a kind of fruit which is rich in vitamin C and anthocyanin. As you know, anthocyanins are very effective against oxidation. The bread contains several kinds of nuts. It is an European-style healthy bread as the staple food. We add honey, butter, and nuts into the dough, making it suitable for both staple food and snack. Then, let's take a look at the formula of this bread. The formula includes 2 parts. One is the sponge dough, and the other is main dough. First, let me introduce the sponge dough. We need 3 kinds of materials: the bread flour, angel fresh yeast, and water. The flour and water in the baking percentages are 1:1, and both are 30%. Then, add 0.3% of fresh yeast. Ensure that the main dough contains 50% bread flour, 10% Baker Dream multigrain flour, and 10% low-gluten flour. Next, add 2% honey, 3% butter, and 1.8% salt. The first step is to make the sponge dough. Have you noticed that there is a hygrometer on the desktop of my work table? It displays the room temperature is 18 degrees Celsius. We also have prepared a table-type 7-liter mixer, which is easy to operate. You can also use a soft scraper to stir it evenly by hand. See, the water temperature is 30 degrees Celsius. Considering the room temperature is relatively low, only 18 degrees Celsius, we adjust the water temperature to 30 degrees Celsius. Pour water into the mixer first. If you put in flour first, it is difficult to stir up the flour in the bowl. Then, add the yeast. Before that, we should properly crush the large particles to make it easier to dissolve. Stir slowly first. When there are no flour particles left, you can properly speed up the mixer so as to stir the sponge dough more evenly. And facilitate the dissolution of yeast. Look at this batter. It is very delicate and even. The temperature is about 25 degrees Celsius, which is close to the required 26 degrees Celsius. Now, let's seal it up. Directly place in a normal temperature environment. After about 15 hours, the state is probably like this on the 2nd day. There are many small bubbles in it. Take a look at its status. Measure its temperature and pH. It shows that the acidity value is 5.2, and its temperature is 12.2 degrees Celsius. This is the production of sponge dough. Let's continue. First, let's see how to stir the dough. Blend the mixable materials in advance. For example, mix the nuts. Then, mix dry materials such as the bread flour, yeast, and low-gluten flour. Since we use 1 kilogram of flour, the quantity is low, and mixing in advance is preferred. Okay, the dry materials are mixed evenly. Note the water temperature. It is about 40 degrees Celsius. The room temperature is relatively low, especially for such a large bowl. Its wall is very cold. So I recommend you use water with higher temperature. In addition, given such a high water temperature, please do not directly mix it with flour. Instead, we should pour water into the mixing bowl first. It is reasonable to raise the temperature of the mixing bowl slightly. Next, put the sponge dough into the mixing bowl, and then the dry material. Stir slowly for 3 minutes. When stirring all the materials evenly, check the softness and hardness of the dough. We should make an adjustment in this part, because I find that the granules of this salt used to make bread are relatively thick. When stirring the material evenly, we have put the salt into the mixing bowl in advance. Then, stir it at a low speed for 2 minutes. After add the salt, turn into the high-speed mode for another 2 minutes. Let's take a look at the current state of the dough. Its gluten has about 7 or 8 layers. In theory, we should add butter and salt at the moment. Stir slowly for 2 minutes after adding butter. Let's observe the state of this gluten again. The gluten is already okay, requiring no high speed. When stirring the dough, the more we get to the later stage, the more we need to be careful. It can be seen that the formation of gluten is gradual when the dough is stirred. If we stir it over the limit, and the process is irreversible, so we must be very cautious when judging the end stage of dough. We should take a complete piece of dough when pulling gluten and pull it from different directions. I think the stirring of dough is a crucial link in the process of making bread. Let's spread the stirred dough on the work table first. Then, scatter the mixed nuts in the dough surface. Roll up the dough from top to bottom. From here, we can observe the softness and hardness of this dough. It is very soft. Do not put the nuts directly in the mixing bowl to maintain the integrity of dough gluten. If there are a lot of nuts, they must be put into the mixing bowl. Roll it up and fold it for 3 times. Ensure the gluten is relatively complete. The temperature of dough is very low, which is only over 18 degrees Celsius. Room temperature is still relatively low. Now, we should make the dough thinner. Then, put it in the fermenting box. During the basic fermentation, the temperature of the proofing box is generally set at 26 degrees Celsius to 28 degrees Celsius. The fermentation time is basically about 1 hour. This is the stirring process of the dough. Next, I will introduce the basic fermentation and segmentation of dough. Set the proofer at 26 degrees Celsius to 28 degrees Celsius. The actual temperature of dough is 25.1 degrees Celsius. It shows the temperature of the proofer is 29.8 degrees Celsius. Considering that the temperature and humidity displayed by the instrument of the proofer are usually inaccurate, I always put a hygrometer in the proofer. The fermented dough is about 1.3 to 1.5 times the volume of the original. Sprinkle a thin layer of flour on the surface. Touch the dough by hand. It feels very soft. It basically does not rebound when my fingers are inserted into the dough. Sprinkle a thin layer of flour on the work table. Then, reverse the dough on the work table. Do not sprinkle too much flour on the dough. Just a thin layer, to ensure it won't stick to your hands. We divide the dough into 400 grams each. We choose a smooth surface and put these broken dough to the bottom. Next, discharge some irregular bubbles in the dough with both hands. Fold twice to include these irregular parts into the dough. After that, make a round dough. Because the bread has to undergo a second shaping, round it at the first stage and do not close it too tightly. This is the dough of European-style bread that has been fermented once. Let's put this hygrometer in the baking tray and put them in the fermenting box together. So how loose should the dough be? In order to shape the bread better, loosen the bread after rounding it. Otherwise, the gluten will be too tight. In that case, first, it is easy to deform. Second, it is difficult to achieve the shaping effect expected. So, after we have rounded the dough, it is necessary to loosen it. We also introduce it to you through video. The temperature required is 27 degrees Celsius. Set the proofer at 26 degrees Celsius to 28 degrees Celsius. Sprinkle a thin layer of flour on the surface of the dough and ensure it will not stick to your hands. Sprinkle a thin layer of flour on the work table. Discharge some bubbles by flapping the dough. In the process, do not to make the dough solid. Keep your hands gently and flap it evenly. After flattening the dough, fold it up and down to make it a rectangle. Put the dough on the mat after shaping. Notice that I put it with its closing upward. Then, ensure that the front face is down so that the surface can be fully loosened. In order to cut the dough easily after fermentation, press this place with your hand to avoid cracking during the fermentation. Generally, no matter what kind of bread it is, we try to make it the same size in width and height. In this way, the bread made looks more comfortable. After the shaping, cover with the fermentation cloth. Reshape some irregularities. This is the process of loosening and shaping bread. After the shaping, carry out a final fermentation and decoration before baking. The key point of the final fermentation is to judge the degree of fermentation, as well as to control the temperature and humidity. For the French bread like this, the skin of the bread is very sticky and it is not easy to be cut if the temperature is too high. So the temperature is basically controlled within 30 degrees Celsius to 32 degrees Celsius, with the humidity of 75%. In this way, it is more convenient to decorate the surface after shaping. We also introduce it while watching the video. The temperature of the proofer is at 29 degrees Celsius and the humidity is still relatively low. Take it out and use a flipper. Put the front directly on the plate and then move the plate out quickly by inertia. This is the front of it. Then, decorate it before baking. First, spray a thin layer of water on the surface of the dough. Next, evenly sprinkle a layer of flour with a screen and cut some openings. I use a blade cutter to make the openings. In this place, we shape the bread into a new face. So, we should pay special attentions here. As before, we put the shaped dough with its closing upward. Turn the front side of it over after fermentation so as to cut it easily. As you can see, it does not stick to the knife at all. A main opening like this, we cut it a little deeper. Decorative small openings like these, we cut them a little shallower since there are nuts in it. For some uncut places, cut them again. Okay, we have finished the decoration before baking. Just spray water, sprinkle flour, and cut the dough. During baking, the key is to control the temperature and time in the oven. Bread as big as this basically requires about 25 minutes to bake. This is the effect picture of the final product. Let's have a look at this video of baking. We are sending this bread directly to the oven. Instead of using a baking tray, let the bread come into direct contact with the hearth. In the case its skin is not solidified, it can be heated and expanded rapidly. Since the furnace temperature is relatively high, if you use the baking tray, it will easily deform and become warped. The furnace temperature we use is 240 degrees Celsius for upper limit and 210 degrees Celsius for lower limit. First of all, set the baking time at 15 minutes. Then, set the steam spray for 2 seconds, but I spray it twice. Some furnaces spray directly for 4 seconds. The water, with large drops, is sprayed out in the later stage. If that water drop hits the bread surface directly, it will affect the pattern on the surface. This needs 15 minutes. No matter what kind of bread is baked, do not set it full at one time in the first stage. If we initially judge that this bread will be baked for 10 minutes, set the time for 6 or 7 minutes. Then, check if it's in the same state as we expected. After that, we may add another 3 or 4 minutes. Just 15 minutes later, we think its color is satisfactory, and we reduce the control fire by another 10 degrees Celsius. It is baked for another 10 minutes at the fire temperature of 230 degrees Celsius. The whole process takes about 25 minutes. Let's have a look at the effect of baked bread. On this one is the water drop from the steam, which is sprayed on the surface. Because the crust of freshly baked bread is still relatively brittle and hard, we should wait for it to cool down a little. This is the baking process of the blackcurrant nut bread. The bread is very elastic. The effect of bread on the video is still not as good as the photo. Have a look at the photo. Its color is very good. The video shows that the color of this bread is a bit dark. Besides, the photo shows these pistachio kernels, which are a little greenish. This is because we added walnuts and hazelnut kernels. The cost of this bread is a bit high. If you think so, use more walnuts to reduce the cost. During the baking, you must know how to control the temperature with time. And how long does it take to bake different bread? This temperature needs to be set by time. That is the point when the baked color is just right. This part needs to be carefully understood. So, this is today's introduction of making blackcurrant nut bread. Thank you for watching.